Alright guys, what is going on? We're back today. We've got the 2JZ sitting right here. I've got all these parts that I've accumulated for it, and today we're actually going to get back to working on it. I know we haven't really been touching on the 2JZ or the Celica recently. We've been working on a lot of our other projects, so this has kind of gotten brushed off to the side. However, while it's been sitting on the side, I've been accumulating all the parts that I need for it to go ahead and get it ready. That way we can throw it into the car. I've got most of the gaskets that I need to replace on this engine. Got a new set of headers, new clutch, new pressure plate, all the nuts and bolts that I need for it. So today we're going to be tearing it down, we're going to be cleaning it up, making it look really nice, really pretty. Then we're going to go ahead and throw on the new gaskets and everything, make sure there's nothing else that I might need to replace ahead of time. And then we're going to go ahead and get it ready to get thrown into the car, hopefully within the next episode or two. Alright guys, so I got a little bit of a pro tip here for you. Whenever you're replacing gaskets on like your intake manifold and your exhaust manifold, one of the things I like to do is I like to get some Scotch-Brite. Sam's Club sells these in a big box you can get for about 10 bucks. You basically buy the box that has a bigger piece of Scotch-Brite in there, you cut it up into squares, and then you use carb cleaner or brake cleaner to clean off the extra residue that's left from the old gaskets and all the oil and everything that's kind of baked on there. And so you want to spray some of this on there, spray a little bit on your Scotch-Brite, kind of slightly sand it all down, get all the extra residue off. You want to do this both on the block and also on the intake manifold itself. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now, but also make sure you don't act like Jesse and don't be smoking a cigarette around your engines, otherwise you're going to light off all of that carb cleaner that you just poured all over your engine and cause a big fire. That's what we do. Alright guys, so here's going to be another little tip trick that I'm going to try. I've honestly never been successful with it, but I've seen so many people do it and give it a try, and I don't feel like running up to O'Reilly's just to get a little bearing puller right now. So I'm going to attempt to do this. Apparently, in order to get the pilot bearing out of your crankshaft, you can use bread. And I've heard like wheat bread, rye bread, I don't honestly remember off the top of my head. I think it's wheat bread. If you use that and you shove it in there enough and eventually you start using like a bolt to put more pressure on it, it'll actually pop that bearing out for you without having to use any kind of special tool. So I got a couple slices of bread here. I'm going to go ahead and start shoving it in behind the bearing, get it packed as much as possible, and we're going to see if I can get this thing to come out. Alright guys, so I just saw the bearing start to pull out a little bit. This is actually the first time, if this works, that it's ever worked for me. I think a lot of it comes down to what size bolt you use. This is the bolt that I found that fits almost perfectly. There's almost hardly any gap between the bolt and the side of the pilot bearing. So I think that's actually what makes a huge difference. So I go ahead and I kind of put it in here. I just keep packing it. I just start tapping it with the hammer. Get more and more bread back there. Try and get this thing as far back as I can. and then I hear it kind of hit the back of the crank, so I stop. Listen a little bit more. It's already starting to protrude out a little bit, so we're getting pretty close to it getting ready to pop out. Kind of exciting. It's the first time I've ever actually done this, and this actually worked for me. Every other time I've tried this, I've never gotten it to work. There we go. She's out, and there's all your bread. So now you just pull all this out, and then you put the new one in after cleaning it a little bit. Nice thing is it's just bread. That's fairly easy to clean. It's obviously very compacted in there. It's got an entire piece and a half of bread all in there. And that's how you get your pilot bearing out without a pilot bearing tool. So now we get to put the new one in after we clean it up a little bit more. Alright guys, so I just got the new pilot bearing put in. What I ended up doing is you want to try and put it on there on the lip as evenly as possible, and then you want to start tapping it in. I just use this bolt. A lot of people will use a socket. This is actually the exact same bolt I used to push the old one out with all of the bread and everything. I used the head side of the bolt though this time, and I was able kind of to put it on there, and then I kind of tapped the other end with a hammer. That way it kind of went in a little bit easier. You do sometimes, if you kind of get one end going in first, you kind of got to tap in the opposite end, then tap the other end in, kind of go back and forth, and then try and even it out to where you can just tap in the center and it just slides in. And it did that for me. It was honestly super easy. It was not hard at all. Probably one of the easiest pilot bearings I've had to install. So next I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put in all of the flywheel bolts. So we want to make sure we torque those to spec. I got to double check exactly what the spec is on this, but usually there's somewhere of 80 foot-pounds, if not more, on most engines. So you want to make sure you have a torque wrench that can handle that amount of load. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done. We'll do that, then we'll throw the clutch, flywheel, clutch and pressure plate on. And then from there, we'll go ahead and throw the exhaust on, and then we'll be pretty much done for the most part. There's not a whole lot of extra work that we need to do to this. Alright guys, so I got the flywheel bolts all put into place. Another trick I wanted to show you guys, whenever you get to the point that you're starting to torque down an absurd amount of torque on these bolts, you're going to find that the engine's going to start to turn over as you're giving it so much force. You can literally start to turn the crankshaft and start moving the pistons and rods and everything. So one way to help lock it in place, especially if you're by yourself and you don't have someone to go hold the other end of the crankshaft on the main bolt on your harmonic balancer, then what you do is right here, you find yourself a bolt that'll either thread into one of the holes, or I couldn't find one that actually would thread in right now. I got to order some, but I got a long enough bolt, put a nut on the other end of it so I kind of hold it in place, but it goes through this bolt hole just fine for the starter. And then what it does is it locks this pin. This is one of the alignment bolts right here for the pressure plate, and so it'll kind of hold pressure using that bolt and this bolt, and it allows you to be able to put that amount of pressure that you're about to put on these bolts. Another point I want to call out too is make sure that you're sitting there and you're doing these bolts in a cross pattern. So if you start here at this bolt right here, you want to go ahead and move over to this bolt, then jump back over, this bolt, this bolt. You always want to be jumping across as you're doing this, so that way you get all of them evenly. And usually you want to give it about 2 to 3 good passes. That way you make sure all of them are torqued completely evenly. You don't want any that are not torqued the same as the others. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to finish torquing them down, then we're going to put the clutch disc on using the alignment tool. And one of the things I also thought about too is whenever you're doing the bread trick, you can actually probably use this alignment tool, because this alignment tool obviously fits in that hole perfectly for the pilot bearing. So if you don't have a bolt that fits this hole, and you have the alignment tool, use the alignment tool. Alright guys, pressure plate is on. It was fairly simple. If you guys have ever done a pressure plate, it's not hard at all. You use the alignment tool, you get the clutch disc on the flywheel first, then you just put the pressure plate on top, start bolting it in. Same thing with this, you kind of want to do a crisscross pattern. I kind of got mixed readings on whether or not what my foot-pounds of torque was supposed to be for the torque specs. I was reading anywhere from 14 to 19 foot-pounds, so I went ahead and just did 19. I usually like to do the higher end, especially on important components that spin. So I went ahead and just did 19 foot-pounds. That way it was at the higher end of the foot-pound spectrum. So I got that all done. I actually did 3 full passes on this. I want to make sure that all 3 of them are completely tight around the exact same amount of foot-pounds of torque. One of the things I want to stress, don't use these, because these can easily go over 19 foot-pounds or 15 foot-pounds, whatever foot-pounds you want to put on your pressure plate. I simply just use this to just put the bolt in fairly quickly, but I didn't let it actually put any pressure on there. I just used it to kind of guide it in before it actually got to the point of applying pressure. Then I did everything by hand, and of course used a torque wrench to make sure I got my torque settings all good. One other kind of quick pro trip is if you get one of these little dollies, I think I got this from Northern Tool or Harbor Freight. They're really nice to have. You can throw the engine on there. That way you can easily move it in and out of the garage. You can twist it, turn it, do whatever you need to. It's really nice whenever you're working on an engine like this. So the next thing I need to do is go ahead and finish cleaning off the exhaust ports. On this, I don't have to do it on the headers because obviously the headers are brand spanking new. Need to finish the exhaust ports on the motor side, on the block. Then once that's done, we can put the gaskets on, put the headers on, and for the most part, we've got the engine pretty much dressed up. I don't really have a whole lot that I have to do. I do have a front main seal that I'm going to go ahead and replace. Unfortunately, though, that's going to be really hard to get to. So we'll have to come back and do that later on. And I may actually go ahead and take all the rear stuff off and redo the rear main seal as well, just to be safe while it's here and I don't have the transmission on. I wasn't thinking about that till earlier. But whenever you guys have an engine torn down and you have the time and space to do so, it's always good to go ahead and replace those main seals because they're a huge pain to do it in the car. So I'm definitely going to come back to the front main seal, and I'll probably go ahead and just do the rear just to be safe. I need to get some special tools for the front to pull that harmonic balancer off. So we'll make that kind of another episode. We'll probably tie that in along with the wiring episode that we're going to do. But other than that, that's about it. Yeah, a little bit of crusty stuff here in the exhaust. That's nice. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll kind of do another time lapse. Will show me kind of cleaning off this side of the engine. We'll go ahead and get the header put on, and then that'll pretty much be it for today's episode. Alright guys, so I just got done putting on the exhaust manifold. Overall, I think it looks really, really good on the engine. I'm really happy with how it looks actually. This is actually just a eBay long tube exhaust manifold for the NA2J. It, for the most part, fit really, really good. The only issue I had was when I was bolting it on, I did kind of have to pull on that back bank back towards the engine a little bit to get it to fully line up with the bolts. Other than that, it went on pretty good. I ended up making myself another stud. I only had this one stud when I was putting the header on, so I went ahead and made this stud back here. I simply just got a bolt that threaded in there. I cut off the head, and then I used the double locking nut trick to be able to thread it into the head. And then, you know, the rest was history from there. It's pretty easy. Overall, I'm pretty happy, though. I think the exhaust fitment is really, really well. I think it's going to look really good once it's in the car. It's definitely going to make the car look really well. I know some of you are probably prone to ask, am I ever going to turbo the car? I do plan on probably eventually turboing this. I want to do just a very mild turbo build down the road. But honestly, with how lightweight the Celica is, I really see me not needing much more power than what the NA is able to provide. You know, if I really do want some cheap, quick horsepower, I may do a nitrous setup or something. But for right now, I'm going to keep it at NA. Maybe later on down the road, I'll put a little bit of a small turbo on there, maybe shoot for like 350 horsepower. Nothing too terribly crazy, because honestly, the Celica is so light, it doesn't need anything more than that, at least for right now. But I'm really happy with how the exhaust looks. I just got to finish bolting it up. A couple more bolts I need to go buy. But other than that, it's for the most part halfway bolted in. Gaskets are in place. Also, I will say, since it did come off of eBay, the gaskets they sent me 2 of the exact same gasket. And technically that's incorrect because that gasket is flipped. And it does technically work. But on the gaskets, there is one side of the gasket that is made for mating to the block, and the other side is made for the header. You'll kind of see one side's a little bit more flat than the other side, and that flatter side is supposed to go to the block. So right now, that's typically like halfway backwards, because that flat side is now going to the header. It still bolts up, it fits, it matches and everything perfectly. There's no issues with that, but I'm probably going to try and get the right manifold gaskets for that, just because it's something more of a peace of mind kind of thing. Other than that, though, I got some authentic Toyota gaskets for the intake side here. I'm really happy with the lower intake gasket. I was surprised. I never realized how thick those intake gaskets were on the lower side. I got the upper side in here too. Obviously, I don't have the upper intake on. The reason for that is I do plan on going with a forward-facing intake manifold. I don't really care for the ones that go over the top, and because we're doing a custom car, there's no need to have one that goes over the top. So I'm just going to get a universal, probably off eBay again, just forward-facing intake manifold. It's hard to find some really good authentic ones nowadays, so I may just go ahead and give that a try.
worst case scenario, I do have 2 stock ones that I could go back to the over the valve cover intake manifold, but I prefer not to. But we do have the metal head gasket. That's basically waiting for it. I still need to clean off this side of the intake plenum to be mated to the upper intake plenum, but I'll get to that whenever I actually install the upper intake plenum. And then I also do have the clutch installed. We got the clutch, flywheel, pressure plate. They're all installed, and the throwout bearing or pilot bearing. Throwout bearing obviously goes in the transmission. So we got all that installed. Again, it went fairly well. I had no major issues with it. I did forget that I do need to replace that rear main seal. I actually had an incident where I was picking this engine out of the car when I bought it, and the rear main seal failed on me and just dumped oil everywhere, all over the place. It pretty much emptied the entire engine of oil. So I do need to know that I need to go ahead and replace that. So I'm going to unfortunately have to take all of this back off and then replace the main seal and then put it all back on. So we'll do that both in the front and in the rear. It's for peace of mind. They're the hardest things to replace whenever the engine is in the car. So I'm going to go ahead and get them taken care of while the engine's out of the car. That way I don't have to sit there and worry about them later on. I'm also, whenever we go install this in the car, I'm going to be making custom engine brackets. I'm not going to probably use those stock ones. I may. If I can make those stock ones work, I might use them, but they're really, really thick and beefy. I'm planning on just using a straight solid piece of metal for my motor mounts going to the subframe on both sides, really. But other than that, I'm really, really happy with how the engine turned out. I'm glad with all the work that we got done today. I'm sad that I had neglected it for this long. I'm glad to be working on it again. So ultimately, make sure you guys like, subscribe, stay tuned for more on this build. Go ahead, comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of this build. Anything you guys would like to specifically see going forward with this build as well. I'm definitely prone to hear what you guys have to say about this build. I'm very excited for it. I'm really pushing to try and get this project done as soon as possible, and I'd really like to be able to have it to where we have the car running and driving by the end of the year. That is kind of a goal that I have in my mind for myself. I really do feel that's achievable. I have almost all of the parts that I need to get the engine and everything bolted in the car. Next, we're going to be putting a 240 subframe in the front of the Celica, replacing the stock Celica subframe. And then once we have that subframe in place, we'll be able to drop this in and start getting some real work done on this build. So you guys make sure you stay tuned. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe. Don't forget to head over to Facebook. We do also have a Facebook page where occasionally we might post some content that doesn't make it to our YouTube channel. So make sure to head over to Facebook, look for Venom Racing, and make sure to like our Facebook page as well. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.